The room is quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that hums. You know this silence. It's the silence you learned before you learned language. The silence that says, stay still, don't reveal too much, don't give them anything they can use against you. You've noticed something strange about yourself. You don't rush to explain. You don't defend your choices. You don't correct people when they misunderstand you. From the outside, it looks like strength, control, confidence, but inside it feels like holding your breath. Here's the paradox no one talks about. The silence that once protected you is now the same silence that isolates you. You learned early that explaining yourself didn't bring understanding. It brought consequences, more questions, more judgment, more emotional exposure than anyone knew how to hold. So you adapted, you became concise, reserved, unreadable. Somewhere along the way, people started calling it power. But what they don't see is that this silence wasn't chosen, it was conditioned. This isn't about confidence tricks or social dominance. It's about the psychological cost of becoming unexplainable to survive and the quiet grief that comes with it. To understand silent power, we need to understand where it actually comes from. Not from superiority, not from authority, but from early emotional unpredictability. One of the earliest roots is emotional neglect. When your inner world was consistently unseen, minimized, or ignored, you learned that your feelings were either inconvenient or invisible, so you stopped offering them. Then came hypervigilance, the nervous system's constant scanning for threat. When explaining yourself repeatedly leads to conflict or invalidation, the brain learns a simple equation: silence equals safety. Your nervous system becomes efficient. You say less, reveal less, expose less. Over time, this evolves into avoidant attachment, not because you don't need people, but because closeness once felt unsafe. Explaining yourself felt like stepping into emotional crossfire, so instead, you withdrew inward. Your mind adapted by processing everything alone, no witnesses, no explanations. This is where silent power is born, not as dominance, but as self-containment. You don't need approval, but you also don't expect understanding. And that distinction quietly shapes your entire life. Here's the part few people admit. Silence costs something. Every time you don't explain yourself, a piece of your inner world remains unshared, unmirrored, unmet. Carl Jung once said, what is not made conscious will be lived out as fate. Silence is one of the most misunderstood, unconscious patterns because on the surface, it looks disciplined, stoic, controlled. But underneath, it hides invisible grief. Grief for conversations that never happened. Grief for being misunderstood and deciding it wasn't worth correcting. Grief for the version of you that wanted to be known, but learned it was safer not to try. The core fear isn't weakness, it's exposure. Exposure leads to judgment. Judgment leads to abandonment. So you keep your reasons locked inside. You don't explain your boundaries. You don't justify your absence. You don't narrate your pain. Over time, this creates a quiet loneliness. You're respected but not fully known, admired but not deeply understood. This is the trade-off, and most people carrying silent power never consciously chose it. They inherited it. This is how the pattern shows up in adulthood. You pull back instead of clarifying. You leave instead of explaining. You assume being misunderstood is inevitable. In relationships, you distance instead of repair. In career spaces, you let your work speak but not your needs. In self-worth, you feel strong yet unseen, independent yet disconnected. In boundaries, you set them silently and feel resentful when they're crossed unknowingly. In emotional regulation, you stay composed while chaos simmers underneath. In identity, you don't fully know who you are, only who you learned you weren't allowed to be. These are not personality traits, they are coping strategies. and coping strategies are intelligent responses to unsafe environments. Unlearning doesn't begin by forcing yourself to explain. It begins with witnessing, not judging the silence, not romanticizing it, but asking gently, when did silence become my armor? Healing doesn't mean oversharing. It doesn't mean justifying yourself to people who haven't earned context. It means choice. Sometimes silence is wisdom. Sometimes it's fear wearing a crown. Healing begins with reparenting yourself, listening without interruption, validating without correction. It deepens through shadow work, reclaiming the parts of you that learned to hide. And it stabilizes when your nervous system learns that expression no longer equals danger. Softness is not weakness. It's the absence of survival mode. As Seneca once wrote, "He who is brave is free." Sometimes bravery looks like letting yourself be seen, selectively, safely, intentionally. The goal is not to explain yourself to everyone. The goal is to stop disappearing from your own life. You were never broken. You were adaptive. And now you get to become whole. If this resonated, share it with someone who carries quiet strength. Subscribe if you're ready to explore psychology beyond survival. Because power isn't silence. Power is choice.